Hello and good day to you from the regional presentation of Hessen here in Brussels, our Brussels live stream. Today we'd like to talk about one of the major topics next to the corona crisis, an important one, trade policy or trade strategy of the European Union. I will do this with Mrs. Hager, Head of Cabinet of Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. Before starting this and getting into the middle of it, I'd like to give the floor back to Wiesbaden, Secretary of State for European Affairs, Mark Weinmeister, for a word of introduction. Thank you. Well, warm welcome to all of you from Hessen. I'm really happy that today's event is taking place again once more with Michael Hager, Head of Cabinet of Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President and Trade Commissioner at the same time. The matter of trade policy is today's topic for us as well at this event. I'm really happy that Hendrik Kafsack has been able to join us again, asking the necessary questions and having a discussion with Michael Hager on the topic. Warm welcome in the name of my Minister, Lucia Puttrich, as well. So we're really looking forward to this and curious to see how the Commission will react to the present challenges in the trade area. The new trade strategy has been presented in February. In the last weeks, new aspects have been coming up as well of real importance to us as well. The COVID-19 pandemic is, of course, for our trade interests, a negative element with a lot of impacts, and we will have to look out how our economic possibilities can be improved again after the pandemic. Trade policy is part of that, not only in the internal market but also beyond our common market. For us as Hessen, people from Germany and Europe, this is of the utmost importance, and major challenges are waiting for us. Challenges on the other side of the Atlantic with our American partners. In the last weeks, in the exchange with President Biden, it has become clear that they will be trying to be a little bit more in a partnership approach with us, in a more conciliatory approach. On the 10th of July, the additional trade tariffs have been taken away, and then the exchange between Joe Biden and with the European Council on the 25th of March. This exchange is a sign of hope, and we'll have to observe the continuation of this development. And then on the other side, our trade policy with China, not always easy. Michael Hager has been paying us a visit before, and in that year he talked about the investment agreement with China that was concluded end of last year. And he delivered a report on that. And in between, additional difficulties have been coming up in the European-Chinese relationship. The Uyghurs, sanctions against European members of parliament, political von Galen, coming from Germany amongst them. And these situations will not increase our trust in China, but it's still an important market, of course, and we have to see how we can deliver results here that on the one side will be in the respect of democracy, rule of law, human rights, and I have to make sure that we have on the other side a very close look at what's going on in China, all the while maintaining it was an important trade partner for us. This is a very difficult balance to strike, and we'll be looking forward to Michael Hager's insights on the topic. And in the area of the Internet, well, elements of the World Trade Organization have to be settled in order to allow us to continue as well. We need the support from the American side on this. And for us as an internal market with a strong foreign trade aspect, it's important to be able to find common rules in a globalized world. So very interesting questions, all of them, and I'm really looking forward to Hendrik Kafsack's questions for Michael Hager, and I wish to all of you very informative midday session here, and we'll be looking forward to a direct contact, a physical presence in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Weinmeister. You've indicated all the questions that we will be able to discuss in the coming 3/4 of an hour, not in a conclusive way, but we'll take up the most important aspects of him. And before we start, I'd like to indicate that you can ask questions as well. If you have questions or remarks, you see it on the screen right now. Phone number is the 0032 4720 30181, and I'm really grateful for all inputs, and you've seen the email address as well for written questions, but I'm quite certain that we'll be able to fill the gap of these 3/4 of an hour. Do I have to introduce Mr. Michael Hager? It's been said, head of cabinet of Valdis Dombrovskis in Oettinger's Hausbefort. He knows all the sofas and chairs in Brussels. No more the sofas. Yeah, now we will not be talking about this for the non-Brussels insiders. Sofa money is a concept over here. Well, you can really allow us to have an insight. Mr. Weinmeister talked about, well, the trade strategy in February. Let's start with this in a general way, presented by commissions. And Niemann really took notice of it. If we react mainly in our paper, the FAZ, we have delivered a report, but there was not a lot of reactions. Or do you have another perception here? Or if so, what might the reason for that, Mr. Hager? Well, if you look at the last 6 months and the topics that have been presented in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, as you said, but in the economic a part of other daily papers as well. Well, the topic coming up, China agreement just before Christmas, United States, the tariff conflict, WTO, new Secretary General. This has to do with the trade policy, all sensitive matters, especially now with the COVID-19 and the questions concerning medical products, vaccines, and so on and so forth. And all this is linked to the trade question as well. And it was the right time, we thought, to present a strategy, to have a look at it, to analyze the present challenges and what might be the orientation for the future. This is not an action plan now that would allow a rollout in the coming days, weeks, and months. It was clear, but it was supposed to be a contribution to the consensus building. It was supposed to indicate that we are continuing on a common path in Europe, and the different expectations that have been combined here were supposed to be shown by this underlining that with trade policy we can really reach results. What are the most important points here? We had the impression in the reception afterwards that there's mainly one question: how can we make sure that trade policy with the Green Deal can be brought in on a common ground, and trade policy in the service of climate protection also. There was criticism afterwards. Why didn't the Commission propose to have all trade agreements opened up again and greened in a renegotiation? Well, first of all, we have to see the departing point from trade policy. I think we need trade policy for our well-being. Europe is export master. We import a lot, but we export even more, and profits are made with this. And this is being translated into possibilities to fund things like the Green Deal or other priorities, digitalization, and so on and so forth in Europe and in the member states. So without a flourishing trade, we will have difficulties to maintain our well-being and to implement our RDs. If we take this as a departing point, we will have to see what are other interests that have to be taken into the trade policy as well. And there have been changes in the course of the years. New priorities have been coming up. Old priorities have been coming up again. And there are things based on the international challenges. Under Trump, trade policy with the Americans has been completely changed. The Chinese development in the last years has had an impact as well. And all this together shows that with a trade policy, we need a strategic orientation in order to have an effect. The Green Deal is one of the points here prominently present at if you have a word count, the number of sustainable biodiversity, green, and so on and so forth, this will be the major topic as compared to jobs and growth. And this underlines and indicates that this is a new full-scale priority that has to be taken into account. But I would not go as far as to say that trade policy is just an enabler of the Green Deal. That would be wrong. It has to support the Green Deal. It has to deliver a contribution as well. And if you read the paper correctly, you can see that the different elements are coming together here. And for the Green Deal, we are doing a lot, but we are not the instrument of the Green Deal. And these prioritization here, trade with a priority of a Green Deal as compared to trade for the Green Deal, is shared on a common basis in the Commission. If you have a look at the paper, it does not indicate that all trade agreements are opened up again in order to integrate the Green Deal in these trade agreements. What we do have there is that in the chapters of the trade agreements and in the future organization of renegotiations, new negotiations, the sustainability topic is playing or will be playing a more important role than in the past. This is clear. And the negotiations we are having right now with Australia or concluded the trade agreement with Mercosur indicate this. If you listen to the parliament here, certain groups at least, with a lot of influence, you have the impression that all this is not enough. We're not only talking about climate protection, we're also talking about topics like the role of the Uyghurs. Mr. Weinmeister just mentioned it as well. Trade can only be done with countries that fulfill all these conditions, and only then does it make sense. Can we advance in trade policy at all with such a preamble? Well, I think the paper is delivering a contribution to this very discussion. What are our objectives with, and thanks to trade policy is important contribution to well-being in Europe and allowing to fund important things like the Green Deal. This is a decision you can make. If we want to overburden trade policy with all kinds of topics, we can do that. But in the field of the benefits, the profits, this will take things away. And there's a societal discussion that has to take place. You were mentioning the discussion in Parliament, and quite rightly so. Obviously, we have different expectations and wishes to be fulfilled thanks to trade policy, but until now, and the paper is underlining this consensus, yes, we have to take up these points. Yes, fundamental values have to be reflected in the trade agreements as well. Yes, new priorities, Green Deal, biodiversity, sustainability, they're all there, but we still have to keep in mind that it's about trade and it's about partners. We want to have a conclusion with for these trade agreements, and these might be partners we have to live with. I will not quote Kissinger here, but in a certain sense, this is a point. But to bring it to the basics, change thanks and through trade, is this still a value? If you say this today, one people will be a little bit shocked, and others are saying, you're really naive, aren't you? And turn to other questions. Well, I would not bring up this a little bit old concept. If you have a look at the different partners, there's different approaches as well. With the Americans, we will have different discussions as with the Chinese, the Vietnamese, Japanese, Australians, or the Mercosur countries. And we have simply to admit that it will be difficult and maybe even impossible in a trade agreement with China to try and deliver a change in society in China. We can try to nudge certain things, elements like sustainability or forced labor, we talked about it last time, can be mentioned. But in trade agreements with China or with others, well, in this case, there will not be all of a sudden free trade unions in China. Let's turn to the United States. Last time we talked a lot about the Chinese, not meaning that this is completely concluded. Things have been happening over there since then. But let's have a look at the United States as well. Mr. Weinmeister talked about the new administration and President Biden. Fundamental question seems to be, is there a substantial change or only in the tonality between both sides? People are afraid that Biden is presenting himself differently, but content-wise, he is more than 100% on his predecessor's line. What's the perception here since the new administration for you? Well, as a matter of fact, the first element to be seen and to be felt as well amongst the changes is the tonality in our exchange. Indeed, it's much more pleasant to talk to the new administration, to have an exchange with the administration, with the trade representatives, more willingness to talk, to listen, to take up topics together with less confrontation. But as a matter of fact, the political orientation has not really changed in most areas. There's no 180-degree change here. There's no pink-colored new painting for a gray image. The topics are still there. The disputes are still there. The conflicts are even there as well. Still, and Mr. Rosbowen, the suspension of trade tariffs in order to get into negotiations indicates that there's more willingness for cooperation, to find solutions. It will be hard negotiations, but possibilities are there as well. And the second point, what is clear here as well, and this is interesting for both sides, Americans and Europeans alike, we will have a look at elements where common initiatives can be launched. The World Trade Organization, the reform over there, also the positioning towards China. These topics are contents for common discussions, for exchange, and this is can be advanced much more easily than with the former administration. For instance, punitive tariffs, Boeing, Airbus, and things like that. Do you have a calendar already for initial discussions? Well, the suspension is foreseen for 4 months to start with, possibly to be extended. What is the objective? Well, we had started with the old administration already. Mr. Dombrovskis had started the negotiations. We had weekly phone calls. So we had tried already at the time to come together. Now, with the suspension of the tariffs, we have a little bit of time pressure, 4 months, and now we have to make progress. And the different possibilities for change are limited. There's certain conditions, certain elements on both sides that have to be taken up and that have to be channeled and framed in a certain way. And I think this is possible. The negotiations have started already. So we are taking up what had been negotiated already. Tonality is more pleasant, like I said. And we think that in these 4 months we can come to an agreement as well, possibly. Question will be, well, there will have to be concessions on both sides. And amongst the member states, this has to be supported as well. Well, it is true then that in the discussions in this whole debate, Commission has less possibilities, $4 billion punitive tariffs, European side 7.8, I think, on the American side. So normally the EU should show itself in a flexible approach, to put it mildly. Well, this whole calculation can be started, of course. But we have a free ticket for additional 4 billion that we did not take up yet, if you start to count. But if I get into the negotiations saying that we only start with the figures, it will be difficult, of course. We have to talk about the substance to start with. And the suspension of this tariff is a signal for both sides. What we do not want, and this is the spillover effect of this whole dispute. All of a sudden, other areas, French wines and peanuts and almonds and Harley Davidson and orange juice, all kinds of different spirits from my home region as well. Exactly, yes. So all kinds of things have been added here. And the suspension of the punitive tariffs will facilitate trade activity. What we want to support, and this shows as well that we have a possibility to have a pleasant way to solve these problems. I'm afraid certainly we have to keep in mind that the time pressure will be important, or maybe even interesting at the end of the 4 months. We have to try and find a solution. What would be fatal would be that after that we drop back in the old tariffs, and that will be taking again months and years. Where are we concerning the other major topic in this area? Steel and aluminum tariffs. Dombrovskis had proposed to have a suspension of tariffs during 6 months as well, but there was no reaction yet. Well, the topic is even more difficult as compared to the Boeing stories, for instance, at Airbus. So the whole steel production, aluminum production has to be seen in a global approach. And this is not only against Europe in this case, and not only against Airbus as one company, as the aviation producer, but it's a matter of handling overcapacities in the steel and aluminum area in general. This is no secret. The European Union thought that taking up the Section 232, the question of national security, as really an impossible approach. And this has been understood on the other side, I think. On the other hand, well, the question of the effectiveness of these measures, that has to be answered by the Americans. But on the other side, and this goes for the new administration as it went for the old administration, the American policy has also a responsibility towards their own steel producers, workers and population. And here it will be a question to know how, before settling this question as such, the global topic can be addressed. I would suppose that movement has been coming up here, but it's much slower than for the Airbus-Boeing topic. But it has been mentioned already. But it's not about having a suspension of tariffs with a comparable negotiation dynamics, if I understand you correctly. Well, there will be no phone call between President Biden and President von der Leyen before the weekend to have such a measure here as well. But it would be not that far away.
Beim Stahlthema gerade sind, kurz die Nachfrage. In Europa ist die Situation im Augenblick so, dass
we are here in Europe, we have prices that are going up, like ThyssenKrupp, and many people say we don't have enough steel, so we shouldn't create new barriers like the Europeans did with the whole tariffs on steel. Shouldn't we think how the new strategy can be, also looking at the fact that we need steel because we need to elaborate it further? Yeah, we are thinking about this. The European interest is not the interest of the steel makers, but we have the whole thing. We are thinking about those who are working with steel or who buy steel, and the overcapacities we had in the last few years and decades, and China is a very important player. They have more than, they produce more than France and Germany, and work on this overcapacities is very important as a reaction to the American interventions. We had our safeguards that have been activated, which means measures to avoid that what couldn't go to the US can come to Europe. That has worked, and we have obviously to go further with these measures. What does this mean for those who need the steel, also for the reconstruction after the COVID crisis? We are working on that, and we are looking on these safeguard measures, considering if we need to go ahead with that. But we have to decide, like at during the next 2 months. We have some countries who asked us to go on with the safeguard measures. We have to analyze this, and we have also to see what are the causes, because if we are talking about WTO, then you can go ahead with these measures for more than 3 years, but then you can have like a kind of a fight back. The countries that are considered can have retaliation measures. Now, we talked about the defense as far as the US is concerned. What can you say about an offensive reducing of barriers like those tariffs? This would be one aspect in order to have it easier in this context. What can you do in this field? At the beginning of December, we already tried to do so with the new administration in the US, and we have seen where we can have a better cooperation with the US. And this is from trade until climate. So we have different elements where we have an offer or where we have expectations in order to find a new way. I think, and Boeing, without this tariffs, we need measures, small steps in order to be successful. And one approach like TTIP, to revitalize TTIP, I think that would be the wrong approach. We have to make step after step, and as I said, like the tariffs for Boeing, steel and aluminium, and we also have to see what we can do in the digital cooperation. I talked about China. All these steps, if we manage to go ahead with this, then we are recovering what we've lost during the years of Trump. And how big is the danger that climate protection could be a danger inside? Because if you are working with the Americans, like the reflection on CO2 limits, CBAN, like they call it here in Brussels, if you don't want to talk about taxes, and this might lead to frictions, and now the restart of a good relationship could be stopped. Well, I have a completely different view, because there is a big interest as far as climate protection is concerned. There is availability, and Mr. Kerry was in the group. We do have this approach before COP in Glasgow in order to have a common platform, a common approach. But we have more in common than it has been in the last years. And the mechanism of to avoid carbon leakage, we do discuss it. And from the American side, we have approaches that might not be the same as the approaches we have. About we are talking about it. If we look at the American side, I can say it sounds very nice, but it's nothing concrete. So I just have to ask once again. Now, the Americans might be inclined or happy to participate in climate protection, but now when the European Union says your productions are paying less for CO2, so we will have tariffs. So I can't imagine that this will be very easy. Well, I didn't show a happy picture. I was talking about a moment where we find a common basis as far as realization is concerned, because our Green Deal in Europe is not fine for everybody. In June, we will have the big package presented, and we have to see how we can go ahead with this field. And obviously, there might be also frictions, but for example, I don't think that there will be a closure. There might be, okay, let's talk about it, where we can find a common field, and this is already a big difference. Okay, so let's talk about this once again, because it's discussed how this might go on. We have one point where we have a big difference in between Germany and the European Union, which up to which point the industry can have certificates at €0, but many want it at 0, and then we get it at borders. With this mechanism, we have to cover different fields. One thing is what the head of states and government said, a contribution in order to for the recovery fund and next generation to be paid. Carbon leakage should be avoided. This is the important topic. We have to see that it is okay for the WTO, and it shouldn't be a nightmare for all of us in the administration. We have to verify how much CO2 we have in these countries, and then we have to calculate all this. All these boxes have to be reunited, and then it's clear that the compatibility, and the president has already said it, is one of the important, really important points. And I guess it will be difficult to have a continuous advantage via the 0 certificates. But it will be difficult to keep it for a longer time. We can have a change, and then we have a phasing in or phasing out of the mechanism. But for the whole time, the imports that come from third countries, and at the same time we have free rides with the 0 certificates, this will not be working. So therefore I hear some flexibility here, phasing in, phasing out. Up to now that wasn't said like this, and it's will be then when we are going versus 2050. I wouldn't like to talk about this as a compatible way, but it's our duty inside the mechanism to find solutions to correspond to the expectations of all sides and to fill all the boxes. And therefore, a phasing in, allowing still the 0 certificates at the beginning and then reducing it, can be explained also to the WTO. Obviously, the devil is in the detail, and until 2050 it will be tricky. And we can also think that we will be limited to some defined products. I guess, yes, we should test it. It would be useful. Call it a pilot, a test with only some products or sectors, and how this will work, because we don't have this in Europe right now, and therefore we should be very careful and test it out before we get lost in the small things. Now, from west to east, when we talk about China, we have talked about the investment agreement, not only about this, but since then we had disputes because on the one hand we have the sanctions from the European side, but not only from the European side, also European Union and British part and the American part, and the Chinese have fought back, which led to the fact in the parliament that the investment agreement can't be ratified like it is right now, therefore it's off the table. What do you think? Is this something that now is going smoothly, and what does this mean for the future in the discussions with China, with the different chains and the Uyghurs? I was talking about it in the last meeting. We need a strategy versus China where we are talking about different chapters. The trade agreement is one of it, but not the only one. And this agreement can't solve everything. With the treaty, we have an access to the market. We have new opportunities for the state companies. The package is well, but it's in a political field. And the sanctions right now and the fight back from Beijing shows that this is a sensitive topic and not only a trade topic. And I think right now it's not useful to bring it into parliament or to talk with the member states, but this hasn't been the plan anyway. We still have to check everything. We have translations to be done, so we can't present it right tomorrow. But we have to consider that with the actual political conditions, it will be difficult to have a majority for this agreement, even if there are big or medium-sized advantages for Europe. It will be difficult to go ahead with it. And the question will be, and I guess this is something that we have to include in our analysis, if we do not have the agreement, then we will stay with the status quo. And the status quo for our trade and for our companies is not an advantage. It is not an advantage for Europe. We might not ratify it or not like the agreement, but we have to consider what the consequences might be, and we have to state it clearly. This means from your side, you would say this agreement, like we agreed upon in the December, should be brought ahead independently from what is happening on other sides. We also have an analysis, but you are in favor of going ahead with it. Yes, we have to see it in the political context, and right now I would not present the agreement. I think the agreement is well made, and we should ratify it sooner or later, but the political conditions should be so that it is something fruitful, because if we present it and then it will be rejected, this is something that we really do not need. So we will see how the sanctions will go on, what will be happening, how the cooperation with China will be alike, and then we have to see at what point we can present such an agreement. And we are talking more about the end of the year or even at the beginning of the next year. So therefore we have still some water running under the bridges. And probably we can include Yangtze. And Mercosur, is there some hope for disagreement, but we see that Mr. Dombrovskis seems to be optimistic, but then nothing happens. Well, the trade agreement with Mercosur was very difficult, long discussions, and we have a result, and there we are at a point where we need to translate, where we also need some fine-tuning for the legal part. And our vice president already said this, where we need also more as far as sustainability is concerned. The agreement as it is right now is a good agreement, but it is not enough at the political part as far, for example, the Amazonas zone is concerned, and it's not what our citizens are expecting, and we should not reopen the agreement, but we should have further things that we can all understand and also enforce. This means that we have to be sure that things will be done, and when this is made, then we have a package that we can present, and we can say, yes, the trade agreement is one part, and then there are also further points we have to discuss. But this will take more time. It will be at least next year. End of the year, yeah. End of this year, beginning of next year. And we are having this talks, and from the Mercosur side, we have the interest, and there is an interest, and therefore these further elements are discussed, and I guess we can come to some result. I have 4 questions from a colleague from ZDF, the second German TV chain. At least 2 of them, we should have a look of them. We are talking about the US, the cooperation in the Technology Council, also Council is concerned, and of the big companies. And the second question, can we have an agreement on the rights and data flow? The idea of Trade and Technology Council is something we already discussed with the previous administration. Now we have the moment and the time to form all this, and Mr. Dombrovskis already talked about it in a first meeting. Now we have to define which the borders are, or what should be in that agreement. We have 5G for sure, the question about digital taxes, what we do with the big companies, the big players here in the field, but we can't overload that. This should lead to a result, and we should also have the cooperation that we will have also with the rest of the world. For me, it's a big opportunity, but the details, well, we are still working on it, but we are not ready yet. Second question, data flow. We have the different decisions from the European Court of Justice. I guess we need to find a way that is feasible. Obviously, this will take time, years. We have many decisions, and you don't like a Schrems 3 decision. We want to go ahead, but we don't want a never-ending story, and we see this in the different decisions. It's not that easy in order to make everything so sure that we can do it. And this field is really difficult. Now, last but not least, Rolf Friedewald, Institute for Law and Finance at the University of Frankfurt, who is looking at the other side. What do you think of the Belt and Road Initiative? Could this global approach with a common goal after the pandemic, could that bring us ahead? Well, the initiative has been started by the Chinese, not with COVID in mind, and the initiatives on the Chinese side are many. 17 plus 1 member states of the European Union and some countries in the eastern part that met with the Chinese. There are several initiatives, not only as far as EU and China are concerned, in order to influence the European Union. Now, the Silk Road Initiative is useful for a bigger exchange, but this leads to a price. And what is done at the different stations on this Silk Road Initiative is we are not appreciating all of it, and we have to see where, in the sense of cooperation, we can go ahead, where we have to put limits, where with our instruments and the trade policy, we have to intervene and show that not everything is possible. And this is a topic that we didn't touch upon because we didn't have the time, where we have a counterbalance from the Chinese next to WTO. I guess this is a very important approach, like direct investments, like infrastructure in Europe, where we also we had this investment screening, and I guess all these aspects have to be concerned. The initiative as in itself, yes, is okay, but not everything is possible. Well, thank you very much for this discussion. We need to talk about Airbus before the summer, and then we have different other topics on our list, because we are also talking about subventions and other topics. It's something huge that should be considered and is considered beyond the corona crisis, and I hope that here in Brussels you can have still a break, because our lunch break is over, and I can tell you that tomorrow, the 15th, at 1 p.m. we have the next meeting. It's the Conference for the Future of Europe. Thank you very much.